higher than that, 200 of the last 250 years. So we ain't got much debt. But we're doubly lucky because in the 50 years in which we had debt at around this level or lower, we had to pay higher interest for it. The interest rate on 10-year bonds is 1.42%, lowest in 300 years. The cost of servicing British public debt has probably only been higher to the British government in 15 or 20 years of the last 250. What we don't have in Britain is a public debt crisis. There is no need to cut the public deficit at the speed that it's been cut at all. It is complete bullshit. We should abandon doing it. It doesn't mean that we can sustain a deficit the size of definitely. It means we have much more scope to be flexible about what kinds of things we cut and when we cut them. We could reproduce what Norman Lamont did in the 1990s if we wanted to do that, or we could delay bringing in deficit reduction until the economy got back on its feet, or we could have a huge program of public works, the capital investment programs that have been devastated in the Northwest would be reinstated. The whole thing is nonsense. I also think it's an important point to make at a time like this. These crises of this scale happen once a century. And most of this, the boundaries between fiscal policy, taxing, spending, and borrowing, monetary policy, the setting of interest rates, financial policy, how banks lend, get very, very fuzzy. In fact, the borders between them almost don't exist. So, for example, if you want to get banks to lend to British companies, one of the ways you do it as financial policy is to offer a guarantee on the new loans they were making. That would be a fiscal policy because that would be a guarantee by the taxpayer. And the flow that you might get, when the Bank of England is quantitative easing, it might buy parcels of the newly created debt, which would be monetary policy. You think of them interdependently. I don't want to spend more on this, we're running out of time. I think there's a huge job to be done on reconfiguring the British ownership system and the British financial system and the British innovation system. But we don't. We need well-owned companies. We need to make certain that we can anchor shareholders. We need to, when you get a quote on the stock market, it is not just about making yourself a potential victim for a predator. It should be about capital raising. We need ownership plurality. We need revolution in a number of cooperatives, employee-owned firms, family-owned middle-sized companies like the German Mittelstand. We have to really get serious about backing new technologies, innovation ecosystem. Again, all that's part of a good capitalism. And we need a 21st century social contract. If we want to mitigate risk for entrepreneurs, businesses, we certainly want to mitigate risk for ordinary men and women. I think we need to rethink the trade union. I know with interest that in Germany, I made this point in the statement I stand by today, and I'm an admirer, I was an admirer in the early 1990s of the dual board system where, amongst others, you had 2 or 3 trade union leaders sitting on the supervisory board of a German company. You can't actually take over a German company as the supervisory board says yes. In our world, that's meant to be an obstacle to enterprise. And I remember when I wrote the statement, what a better it was, I was saying that Germany will manage unification and will be the biggest and most productive economy in Europe by 2010. My bold bet when I wrote the book. I remember thinking, shit, it's going to look dodgy for a long time. So you take a lot of hits, but in 2012, it looks a lot more pressing than it did when I wrote it in 1995. When I was tasked by the coalition government to look at the question of fair pay in the public sector and private sector, I argued that 2 members of the workforce, this is on remuneration committees, in both the public and private sector, had any contractor to the private sector, like CRESC or CRESC, should also have on the remuneration committee a couple of trade union employees as a condition of getting a public contract from the taxpayer. That's a good idea. Let's do it. Let's see things up. Then I am an apostle of. It's good to see housing emerge. Good to see on the agenda. Good to see Miliband talking about skills we did at this conference today. And I also think I'm a big apostle of this flexicurity, which the Danes and the Dutch have pioneered. Absolutely, you went about the workplace bargains. In a fast-moving environment where technologies are piling in one another, actually firms do rise and fall very quickly. And firms, and especially small and medium-sized firms, do need to adjust the size of their workforce up and down very fast. That's more risk in the workplace. Apart from having new trade unions and potential shock absorbers, I had this idea that we could develop trade unions as would themselves hire out workers to firms. And so firms wanted to kind of build up their workforce rapidly, they would do through the trade union. When down, they could do, the trade union would get back to the carrying pay by the union would be the shock absorber with this change in labour markets. And permit ordinary working men and women to have some stability and security in their lives. But you could buttress that with a kind of serious system of lifelong learning, and much better unemployment benefit, so that you can transition from one job to another in a reasonable relationship to what you were earning when you were in work. And actually, the government has to accept, like the Works Progress Administration in Roosevelt's New Deal, the responsibility of the employer of last resort. I was to say, is any of this feasible? Is this just Will Hutton shooting his mouth off? Is this feasible? Well, I mean, I have a number of points to make. I mean, the centre-right mantra of the last 30 years is no answer to social and economic problems and the depth of what I described in 2012. And the people know it. That booed for George Osborne, I think, would tribute to that. And it was Salisbury in the 1890s, the arrival of universal suffrage, worried whether the Conservative Party would ever win a consistent majority in the British Parliament. The strategists of the Conservative Party worry that again after what took place in 2010. And I don't think that the British right, attached to the ideas that it has at the minute, will ever win a majority in the country again. But have to change substantively to do that. One nation Tories or Christian Democrat type Tories is a possibility, but a kind of free market centre-right Conservative Party isn't going to do it. Cut it. That is a big thing to say. Simultaneously, there are elements in the British finance, and who really think that the time has come for the bank to reinvent themselves. On my ownership commission, which I chaired, arguing for some of these points, interestingly, Roger Carr, chair of Centrica and current president of the CBI, also sat and signed up for some of the ideas that we have on the ownership commission. There, it's not just Elizabeth Murdoch and Anne Jenkins, there are a number of people around who are starting to say this system has to change. But I mean, God, we have such a journey to travel. I mean, I noted that Miliband in his speech at the conference is going to push on what he said at the last economic conference. And the trouble is not enough people thinking through what this means. When I put these slides up, unionism, 3 sentences, but Christ, that's a huge thing to say. Ownership, redeveloping British ownership system is a vast thing to say. I mean, we really need, thinkers, intellectuals to combine with doers to come up with some practical answers to how so things can be rolled out fast. I mean, taxation, when the taxpayers, every time I hear the Taxpayers Alliance, I want to kind of scream. The notion that, you get nothing back from tax except over your own estate, and that none of the public infrastructure, soft infrastructure around the state is of any value. And there's still a big battle, I think, to make that case. But for me, it's self-evident that the kinds of things I've been saying tonight, give or take, are the only way through. If we are going to, close some of the social chasms that are opening up, we've got to have we've got a 21st century social contract. If we're going to capitalise on the scientific development opportunity and build companies that endure, we've got to have a good capitalism. And we've got to reinvent the ownership financial innovation platform in our country, clear. And to do that, we're going to build a coalition for change. And I think, in a way, just to finish off on this, and I think in some respects this is perhaps my most provocative challenge to you. I think the left, for a large part of the 20th century, the European and the British left kind of neglected the Enlightenment tradition which gave birth to it. It's too quick to talk about socialism means of reduction, to adopt the language of state planning, the ideas of the digital working class, and was not clear enough about kind of the Enlightenment lessons about the need to live in a pluralist society, an open society. I think the left has to reclaim that Enlightenment tradition, which actually Miliband, in his way, is trying to do, and which the social liberals in the Liberal Democratic Party, Vince Cable, are trying to do. It's one of those things that when they text each other, as they boast they do, Ed Miliband and Vince Cable have in common. And I think there are some very interesting voices in the trade union who are talking in these terms, and some very interesting movement, and some very interesting kind of voices in British business who are talking in these terms. There is a coalition to be built, and one of the allies of this coalition, by the way, is the British regions. Because the way this system has operated over the last 30 years has been massively unfair to people living outside London and the South East. And the British regions are part of this coalition. Is it buildable? I think it is. Is the intellectual agenda there? I think it is. Does it have to be done? I think it must be. Is it feasible? Yes. Thank you very much.